You know what is a good deal?
What is it?
Doing this podcast with you.
It is. And you know what? I am thinking about putting the Patreon up for this podcast so we can pay an editor. But when we were doing the show for the first year, we had guests on regularly. And it was a lot of fun. It was also a lot of editing time. Tanya and I staying up until 1, 2 in the morning, and work nights. And
there were times where before I would go to work, I would be like up at 5 in the morning editing.
Yeah, you really...
And like just like Jonathan, my brain is breaking.
Yeah. And it's tough to maintain that for a while. And we also both got new jobs since then that are a little bit more intense. But we want to bring the guests back, and one of the ways we could realistically do that regularly would be to pay someone to edit the guest segments, because when we edit ourselves, since we know ourselves, it's a little bit less time intensive for us to sit and edit.
Get it right. We know what we want.
Yeah, and we know what we did, and we can make a note of how to fix it. And frankly, with the guests, and if you're one of our former guests listening to this, I'm happy to get to tell you this again. I was always super uptight about making sure the guests sounded as great as possible. If I sound kind of dumb, whatever. I didn't do anybody wrong. I just kind of failed to sound awesome, which is fine. I'm used to not sounding awesome. And you, Tanya, always sound great. And I also talk a lot during our segments, so it's mostly me worrying about whether I sound like a butthead. And I'm not that worried about it. The guests, I want them to sound like gold, which means more time in the editing bank. So we may put up a Patreon. Keep an eye peeled for it. If we do, all the money is
every
going to
last
go
penny
to whoever ends up editing it with us. And we'll still do some of the editing ourselves, but the guest segments in particular, we would likely hand off to an editor, and then we would check it out to make sure that we think the guests sound as good as we want them to sound and are doing right by them the way we want to. And then we would be off to the upload.
That's right.
On SoundCloud.